should be under any illusions. We voted against the operational separation regime that currently exists. So we clearly demonstrated we did not believe it could satisfactorily achieve the objectives of even your government's policy at the time.
So the government is not sort of formally resolved to implement some greater degree of separation. It's simply a question of how much. That's not the position. You're saying that the government is looking at a range of options, but hasn't.
No, we don't have a final.
But you have an open mind, and one of
the options is
presumably the status quo.
Well, the status quo we don't believe has worked. Right. We voted against it on the basis.
Status quo is not an option.
Status quo, we've made clear, we believe has failed. The ACCC opposed. Well, that's not fair to say they opposed it. They indicated that they believed there were better options than the previous operational separation regime. I think they sat in one of these rooms and outlined.
I don't want to know their view. I want to know where the government is at.
No. The point I'm making is that the operational separation regime that exists today, we did not support in Parliament. We voted against it, and I've repeatedly said that we believe that the existing set of regulatory frameworks has failed. So I would probably say yes, that the status quo is not something that anybody supported in the regulatory discussion process that we.
Apart from Telstra, presumably.
Yeah. Just quoting from the document, which said, maintaining the current separation arrangements will not deal with the issues concerning Telstra's use of its vertical integration. In light of this, there are a number of options the government is considering.
Yeah, I'm just drawing your attention to your statement that the government has not decided to proceed with any particular option this time. Does that, so we take it to mean you will proceed with one of the options in there, but you're not sure which one at this stage?
That's why we have a discussion paper. We have an open mind based on the discussion paper. We'll be determining our position. I mean, we quite clearly state the government does not have a predetermined view on these matters, and we have an open mind about the reforms that should be pursued. That's stated on page 4, under my name even.
Not inconsistent.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm just trying to clarify, the extent of the openness of your mind. I think what I glean from your comments are that while you've not decided to proceed with any particular option,
that status quo
in relation to separation, where you've set out really two options, strengthening the current operational separation regime, option 2, functional separation. I think they're the two options you're looking at. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. So we take it that status quo is not one of the options you'll be considering. Is that correct?
I think I just read you out a paragraph which said...
It's page before, sorry, that's there it is.
Maintaining the current separation arrangements will not deal with the issues concerning Telstra's use of its vertical integration. In the light of this, there are a number of options the government is considering.
So, and then you set out two options. So I assume you're considering those two options.
Well, the purpose of a discussion paper is to see if there's any other options that might be generated.
Right.
But certainly we've outlined a couple.
So you are not prepared to rule out structural separation?
It's not in the paper.
It's not in the paper. We've never...
well, it's in
I don't believe I've ever advocated it.
Telstra might want to do it.
Telstra may volunteer it.
Yeah.
Who knows? There's a new regime in town.
There was a newspaper article suggesting that they might, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was even a newspaper article suggesting that they may contemplate it. So who knows what the new future will look like, Senator Mitchell. It's one of the reasons we've got a discussion paper. I'm not saying I believe. Can I say I'm not saying I believe the newspaper article, but
so you're not ruling out. Well, I'm asking you whether you'd rule out forced structural separation.
I'm not advocating it. I've never advocated it. I think I can say that.
Well, interestingly, Senator Conroy, and
I
don't criticise you for this. You've never actually advocated separation, as far as I can tell. It's never been.
I've certainly never advocated structural separation. I don't believe. I think that's a true statement. What I have said, though, is the existing regime is not satisfactory. So that probably leaves you a spectrum from there. But if, for instance, the incumbent come forward and said, hey, look, this is what we think now...
The LP didn't go to the last election with a formal policy on this, did it?
No. We went with the NBN.
Yeah.
And we're delivering and exceeding on it, as you keep...
It's quite denying I've had enough.
Well, we can stop asking questions about 1.1 any time you like. One of two things will happen. Either my voice will completely give up on me or we will change the topic.
Sorry if we're keeping you up.
I think
after some 7 hours on the NBN I've had enough. But,
You are a trooper. You are a trooper, Senator.
I was trying to do the right thing by you, Minister, and look what happens.
Look, I actually just want to ask some questions about the Digital Regions Initiative.
Right, digital region.
And the questions it relates back to. It does relate back to the NBN because I wanted to ask
Fair enough.
how this initiative works.
Surely
with
Sorry,
the
there's
NBN.
Senator, I'm just going now. Race to find. I don't have an officer that.
I'm actually happy to put them on notice if that's
lovely.
easier.
That'd be marvellous.
You are
I
now
shall do that.
officially my favourite senator.
Thank you very much,
I'll place
Senator.
my questions on notice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh no! I think now I know why Senator Minchin doesn't like you.
It's okay. We won't be too long. I just wanted to quickly jump back, touch briefly on some of the regulatory stuff, but hopefully only quickly. Minister, in terms of the regulatory framework, you're pursuing now, as we discussed, a further review given the new context, following the review from last year, which looked into options for the regulatory framework. You were quite scathing of how the current system works in your comments. Are there any interim changes you're considering?
Interim between now and
Between
June
now
the
and
3rd?
Well,
No.
between now and when you actually get your
Well, our
total
intention,
new
our
regime
intention
in
is to bring
place.
forward legislation in the second half of this year, and we look forward to your support and speedy passage.
Will that legislation deal with what will be an existing framework in the
It'll be
rest of
the outcome.
Australia for
It'll be the
most
outcome arising from the discussion paper. So we look forward to your speedy support.
And in terms of your damning assessment of how things currently work, are you largely writing off all of Australia's? Are there any areas of success you can recognise in the Australian communications landscape where you think things may have worked reasonably well?
Well, that's why we've got a discussion paper. But I think if you looked at, 80-odd
82,
submissions,
yeah.
82 last time, not one submission recommended the status quo. Some of them recommended in different directions, but no one recommended the status quo. Clearly, the unanimous view of the sector was the existing structure was not working.
Including Glasson's. Glasson's was.
And the Glasson review also was scathing.
Most people can come up with some levels of suggestions for change, and some will suggest more than others. My question is, in terms of unbundling rates, for example, do you think Australia has actually progressed well in that regard?
We have set out the areas that we are considering in the discussion paper. I don't know how much more transparent we can be than that, Senator Birmingham.
Senator, the paper does actually canvass options that have been suggested at various times to the government, and there's commentary throughout the paper drawing on the submissions we received in the process, quoting any number of people who want to change in one direction and people who want to change in the other direction, and then it asks a series of questions. So we are suggesting to all sorts of groups that they focus their analysis on the merits or otherwise that they see of the relative options in there. So it's actually quite a focused, deliberative process. If you see the 82 submissions received from the government as telling us everything they want to change, and then this is a funneling exercise, we are expecting by the 3rd of June we'll get very concrete commentary on the proposals or alternative suggestions, so that then we can present options to the government, and the government will consider it then then proceed forward with the legislation. So this is meant to be sort of the arrangements that would be in place as we roll out the NBN. We know at the end of the process, when NBN is fully effective and as a wholesale-only company, that will radically alter the competitive environment. But in the meantime, people have been hankering for reform for a very long time, but you know, even Telstra, as Mr. Lyons points out to me, has said on record that the regime at present is beset with conflict, long-running disputes, gaming and inefficiencies. You wouldn't be able to find too many people that think that reform isn't a good idea in some shape or form. So,
no, I'm not arguing that reform isn't a good idea in some shape or form there, Ms Scott. As you said there partway through, you of course get positions from one perspective and the other perspective that are often from totally contrary positions.
That's
You're
right.
trying to funnel them down. I'm sure at the end we'll see that whilst there will be some valuable reforms there, I trust, and hopefully some reforms that we can all agree on, which would be good, there will equally be, I'm sure, a lot of parts of the existing regime that will continue in some way, shape or form where they have worked. It's just
That's right.
listening to the minister, you'd think the whole lot was being shredded.
well, I guess in some ways you could look at it if someone had the opportunity to read the 57 pages, 53 I think, once you take out a few things, they would have a good insight into the areas that the 82 submissions, the Glasson report, numerous inquiries have highlighted to governments as areas of requiring reform. So in some ways it answers it by its omission.
Thanks, Ms Scott. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. There being no further questions for program 1.1, thank you.
Just on 1.1.
Oh, look, I think Senator Trace was just about to
Not NBN related.
do some very serious
Very,
damage to anyone who asked another question, Senator Minchin, and you were the closest. I think you just made a grave mistake.
Always happy for questions to be asked. Always.
Just a very quick question, pardon my ignorance and relative newness to this portfolio. I notice you provide a rather princely sum of 6.335 million per annum for international organisations' contributions. Could you enlighten me on why such,
Mr.
in
Besgrove
these
can
straitened times,
Mr. Besgrove can help
of
me.
massive deficits,
Quickly out
we're
the
still
door,
spending
Senator.
6.3 million on
Yes, this is
things
a
I'm sure Senator Conner would much rather spend domestically.
Senator, this is a long-standing contributions to international organisations, but I'll get Mr. Besgrove to explain
Can
them.
be just brief, but I'd just be interested
Yes,
where that goes.
Yeah. I think we also cover it in the annual report, and what I'll try and do is find you a reference in the annual report, Senator, why Mr. Besgrove goes through that.
Senator, the reference in the PBS is a combined figure. It has two components. It's Australia's annual membership fees for the International Telecommunications Union, which is I don't have the figures in front of me, but it's of the order of about 5 of the 6 million, and that's an annual fee which is, it was determined under the previous government that we would contribute what are known as 13 membership units. Countries who are members of the ITU determine their level of contribution, and when the last time this was reviewed, it was under the previous government, I think about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was determined that we would pay 13 membership units.
Does that mean we get 13 votes?
Sadly, no, it does not.
What sort of operation is this?
But for example, countries such as the United States...
It's not the way your gratification is.
Countries such as the United States contribute about 30 or 40 membership units from memory. The membership units are denoted in Swiss francs, and depending upon the exchange rate, the Australian contribution varies up and down. But as I said, about 5 million of the 6 million is our contribution to the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union. And the remainder of the money is our membership of the Asia-Pacific Telecommunity. Both of those organisations are treaty-based organisations, and this portfolio has carriage of Australia's membership, and so we participate in both of those organisations. So That's what the money goes to. It's consolidated in the PBS, which is why it's a little more cryptic than it might have been.
And are all OECD countries members of this ITU? Is it very wide membership? Though?
The ITU is the oldest United Nations body. It was originally set up in the time of the telegraph, so it's more than 150 years old. And it has, I think, I'd have to take this on notice, but I believe it has about 180 member countries.
Okay.
The Asia-Pacific telecommunity is somewhat smaller.
Sure.
But the ITU is an important body because it's a treaty-level organisation. Every 4 years it has a plenipotentiary meeting which makes decisions about telecommunication standards which are binding on the member countries.
Right.
And the particular allocation of spectrum, particular purposes. So if we buy, because we are an equipment buyer, we would like to have
it's actually important to participate.
We'd like to have some say in how valuable spectrum ends up being used, because we can go it alone, but that will be very difficult in terms of equipment purchase. The annual report has a nice summary on page 62 and 63, just quickly setting out how much we contribute to those organisations, and measurements of quality, effectiveness, quantity, and just a very short 2 or 3 paragraphs on that. So,
okay, no, I'll look that up. Thanks. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. That concludes questions about program 1.1. We will now move to program 1.3, broadcasting and digital television. If I could have those officers, please. The committee could have them. Have a short suspension while that's organised.
thank you, Steph. Appreciate that.
No, it's 9:30. Thank you, everybody. So program 1.3, broadcasting and digital television. I'll go to Senator Fielding.
Thank you. I think I started here somewhere else, didn't I? Another part. So you know what it's going to be on. So on the anti-siphoning stuff, can you let me know where the review's at and what's happening there? Or
I think I said yesterday at some stage, possibly to yourself or someone else in the building. I believe we're trying to expedite the release of the paper, which will begin that formal consultation process.
I think there was some commitment made, wasn't there, about when it was going to be done by?
Oh, there's a legal requirement
Yes.
for it to be completed by the end of the year.
End of this year, isn't it? Yeah.
So we hope to release, as I said, the paper very shortly.
Right. So can you just go through the process of what's, if you
Certainly,
can, just,
I'm sure
an
Mr. Pelling
overview of
would
the
love to
process
take
of
you
how it's
through
going to sort of.
Yeah, Simon Pelling, First Assistant Secretary of Broadcasting and Content. As the Minister said, there is a statutory requirement in the Broadcasting Services Act to conduct a review of the anti-siphoning scheme. The Act sets out a range of things that have to be considered in the scope of the review. The review has to be conducted by the end of this year, and then a report has to be produced which is tabled by the Minister within 15 sitting days of that report's production. The process which we're proposing to engage in is the release of a public discussion paper with a period for public submissions, following which we will look at the submissions and prepare advice to the Minister and prepare a report for his consideration.
Okay, and you haven't got a timeline on that yet at all, other than it's the end date?
No, it's as the Minister has said,
Yeah.
the process is being expedited as quickly as possible. It has to be conducted by the end of this year, so it'll take place over the next few months.
So the recommendation from the department, obviously in the end it's the Minister and the government's determination of what's on that list and what's off the list?
Well, that's yes. Fundamentally, the list is a matter which the Minister has control over. So, at the end of the day, should the Minister, as a result of the outcomes of this review, choose to make any changes to the list, or indeed at any other time, should he choose to make any changes to the list, he has the power to do that under the legislation.
At this stage, do you see any sort of major changes, or is it steady as she goes, or how would you?
Oh, that's a matter for the review, and ultimately a matter for government policy.
The government's keen to promote digital television take-up, and there are already more digital boxes out there than paid television. Is there some restrictions on free television and their allowance to play listed sports on their second channel when pay TV can play on whatever channel they want?
There are restrictions in the legislation on the use of sports on the anti-siphoning list on digital multi-channels. Those restrictions essentially provide that events on the anti-siphoning list can be shown on multi-channels only if they have already been shown or are simultaneously shown on the main channel, that is the channel which is simulcasting the analogue service.
So is that something that's going to go through the consultation process for change as well, or is that legislation
that will be looked at in the review?
Because obviously if you're trying to promote digital television, the whole idea is you have multi-channels, and otherwise you're driving it all back to just having a single channel.
That'll be an issue which is canvassed in the review.
All right, I'll probably follow it up next time, I think, and just see how it's really going. I'm pretty keen to see where this ends up from there. So thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Fielding.
Are you able, for the benefit of this committee at this stage, to identify objectively the sort of 3-4 key issues that are being raised or you expect to be raised, that will be essentially the focus of the...
The legislation, I don't have the precise words in front of me, but it's broadly has to consider the operation of the anti-siphoning scheme and whether it should be amended or repealed. the operation of the licence conditioned on subscription television broadcasters restricting access to listed events and whether it should be amended or repealed, and the operation of the restrictions on commercial television broadcasters in relation to multi-channel events, and whether they should be amended or repealed.
Right. I was going to say that the issue that is constantly raised with me is this multi-channelling, being able to show events on their multi-channels. So that will be very much a
yes. So the broad terms of reference are set in the legislation. They're very broad,
right?
But essentially that allows a broad review of the scheme.
Not personally.
And the review, and I apologise outside when Senator Fielding started his questions, the review I know is to be, the timing and process is to be announced shortly, I think was a response. Very shortly.
I couldn't remember if it was yourself or Senator Fielding who answered that question to. It seems so long ago.
It was a question on notice that I had, and it said shortly then, so I'm assuming it's very shortly now.
Very shortly.
Very shortly.
Imminent even.
Okay, and in terms of anti-siphoning, just if we're staying on that for a second, you of course made some comments previously about anti-siphoning back when you had the horror of sitting on the opposition benches and certain things that may be added to the anti-siphoning list.
Yes, the Socceroos matches. We have an election commitment on.
The Socceroos qualifiers were
Socceroos World Cup qualifiers.
World Cup qualifiers were in a, so they weren't just a Minister Conroy commitment or Shadow Minister Conroy. It was an official Labor Party election commitment,
and that is just will be rolled into the final outcome of the anti-siphoning list.
Right, so
conversations.
So will that be a footnote to whomever is conducting the review that...
we have an election commitment, and as you know, Senator Birmingham...
Here is the election commitment made by the government, and it won't matter what the merits of the argument are, this will be...
look, I've debated the merits of this at considerable length, and like many Australians, we consider that
from your very
the Socceroos are of now the iconic status of the Wallabies, the Kangaroos, our cricket team, our netball team, and a whole range of other sports where there's an Australian team playing in an international competition that's of that level of significance, then we believe it should be on. So I'm happy to re-debate any day of the week. Senator Coonan wants to liken the Socceroos to the Tour de France, but I think she'll live to regret that.
Is there anything else that you're willing to give a personal guarantee to on the anti-siphoning list?
That's the only election commitment we have on this. Other than that, we go into the review with an open mind.
Starts and ends with the Socceroos World Cup qualifiers. Everything else is on the table.
No, everything else is subject to the review.
Well, which with an open mind means everything else is on the table. Will the findings of the review be made public? Is that a requirement of the Act?
There's a requirement that a report from the review be tabled in Parliament.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Pelling.
Just for the record, Senator Birmingham, as far back as 2001, the previous government was informed by the Australian Broadcasting Authority that soccer is a sport with a growing following amongst Australian audiences generally. It matches rugby union in level of interest in television viewing, and that consideration should be given to listing international soccer matches involving the senior Australian representative team. Notwithstanding that, your previous government failed to. And I'd probably say that since 2001, the Socceroos have become much greater following than even rugby union.
Thank you, Minister. I'm just checking that you are still standing by your commitment there. And, and I'll look forward, of course, to seeing how everything else is treated in that regard. That's all on anti-siphoning for me. There's others on...
I'm sure Senator Fielding has a strong view on the Socceroos as well.
Depending on declare an interest here. I do play soccer still, so I am very aware of the government's commitment to make sure the World Cup matches are played on free air. I'm still, and for the record, I'm boycotting paid television. I don't have it, and I like free-to-air television, like a lot of Australians. So. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Fielding. There's no further questions on anti-siphoning. Then we will go to digital television. Senator Wordley, did you want to lead off on that?
Thank you, Chair. Can the department tell us something about the digital TV campaign that's just been run recently?
I'll ask Mr. Townend to answer that question. Senator?
And perhaps in doing so, can you tell us why it was necessary as well?
Sure. Okay. Andy Townend, Deputy Secretary, Digital Switchover Task Force in the department. The campaign was designed to raise awareness of the switchover to digital television. The campaign aired between the 5th of April and the 2nd of May, and there were two separate campaigns on the TV. There was a 45-second infomercial and also a 30-second, which also ran. The first 45-second set was actually talking about awareness of digital switchover and raising a number of issues, and basically designed to make sure that people were aware that switchover was coming and that they needed to do something. The second shorter ad was 30 seconds, and that was designed to point people towards labels which had also been introduced at the same time in retail environments and on equipment. Those labels were designed to help people make informed choices about digital television equipment. The campaign was designed to reach, in the first instance, something like 80% of people were designed to see the campaign at least 3 times, and 94% of people would have been designed to see the campaign at least once. It felt important to run this campaign because whilst a number of people have converted to digital television, there is still a large number who haven't, and it's important that people make that switch in plenty of time before the actual switchover in their region. And you'll recall the switchover is taking place between the first half of next year and the end of 2013, and it's therefore important to make sure people are aware of that and start to take action in plenty of time, and that also they know where they can get information to help them make the decisions they need to do.
Thank you. Did the government draw on any international experience in preparing its information for the campaign?
Yes, we did. We looked very closely at, in particular, the United Kingdom and the United States. The United Kingdom has adopted a very similar programme to that which we are running, where there is a phased switchover, with a switchover happening at a series of dates over a period of time, and with an information campaign designed to raise awareness of switchover, build understanding, and actually provide people with information about what to do. And that appears to be progressing reasonably successfully. We also look carefully at the United States of America, where things haven't progressed quite as smoothly. They had a single date at which they were going to switch over, which was originally February this year, and was delayed almost immediately after President Obama took office, and they've now deferred that switch to the 12th of June. And in fact, latest Nielsen research suggests that over 3 million households are still unprepared for that switch. So the information campaign that we've been running is designed to pick up on the best of what's been taking place in other countries and try and avoid some of the mistakes that other countries have experienced.
And in relation to monitoring how successful that campaign has been, I know you said it only finished on the 2nd of May. Is there any indication on that?
Well, one of the things that we have just published on Friday, the 22nd of May, we published the digital tracker, which is now available on our website, and I do have a copy of it here, which I'd be quite happy to provide. That's measuring six different critical success factors. It's measuring awareness of switchover, understanding of switchover, people's attitudes towards the switchover, their intentions to switch, actual conversion, and then satisfaction with that whole process. Now, those first tracker results deal with the period ended 31st of March, so they don't actually reflect what would have happened in that information campaign. But the next version of the tracker, which will be published in about 3 months, will show, one hopes, the improvement over that period of time.
And Senator, that's a news poll survey that we have procured in order to be able to.
It's not Andy on the phone. It's not.
Yeah, so that we know what customers are doing, what's motivating the change, what's not motivating them to change, so we can take remedial action if necessary and change the messages as we go through the campaign process.
So sale of digital set-top boxes would be an indication of it.
Things working well. Yeah.
It's working well. I just know that I went to buy my mother one in the lead up to Mother's Day for her second television in her bedroom, and you couldn't get one anywhere.
Anecdotal evidence we've got from stakeholders has certainly been that there's been an uptake during the period of the campaign, and obviously once we get the next version.
Well, those $900 checks, eh?
Sorry?
Well, those $900 checks.
Thank you.
Just shows that stimulus package working.
That's right.
That shows that stimulus package working.
Where are the set-top boxes made, Senator Cotton?
The retail workers in those shops certainly appreciate that.
And so do the Chinese who are making them, no doubt. Yeah.
So,
I think it's more, put it more down to the
Your global
you're not
stimulus package.
suddenly becoming a protectionist, are you?
No,
Senator
I'm
Mitchell?
just
It sounds
interested
that
in
way,
your
doesn't
desire
it,
to
Senator
stimulate the
Conway?
Chinese economy.
Okay, the government recently convened a consumer expert group. Can you tell me why this group was convened?
Yes. It's very important that we make sure that everybody receives the message about switchover. The campaign that we've been running is designed to raise awareness across the general population. Again, based on evidence from overseas, particularly again the UK and also the USA, but other European countries that have also completed switchover, it's very important that we work through communities. Some people will find it quite hard to receive the message or understand it, and therefore we felt it was important to work with a number of consumer organisations to both receive information from them and feedback on whether our communications were cutting through, and if not, what can we do about it. And also, many of those organisations have means of communicating with their constituents, and a number of them have already offered to help us get that message across. The first meeting was actually held on the 7th of May, and 11 organisations were represented. Sure. For example, Vision Australia, the Country Women's Association, Australian Seniors Computer Clubs Association, St Vincent de Paul, Salvation Army, and a number of organisations of that type.
Particularly the people who might be frightened about technological change, feeling unfamiliar with technology that might worry about this, and that's why we want to particularly engage those community groups that have got good contacts and good understanding of vulnerable groups.
Yeah.
Can you tell me something about the role that the community liaison officers will be playing in the switchover areas?
Sure. Again, based on evidence from overseas and also talking to many of these consumer groups, it's going to be really important that our messages actually do get out into the communities, and that people who live in particular communities know that there's someone to whom they can turn to ask questions, to be our eyes and ears on the ground, and also in many ways to help us mobilise voluntary effort on the ground in particular areas. So we do have a programme to appoint community liaison officers in each switchover area to help us get that message across in a very practical way.
What is the government doing to actually monitor how the message about switchover is getting out? I know we just touched on it a moment ago, but can you go into that in a little bit more detail?
Well, that would be, I mean, that's partly the digital tracker reports. That's looking at those 6 critical success measures. Equally, our consumer expert group will also provide feedback because we'll be meeting them on a regular basis. We'll be sharing the tracker reports with them, but they'll also be giving us, together with the community liaison officers, very important feedback on what's actually happening on the ground, and also giving us particular insight into those vulnerable groups who may be actually finding the process difficult, or who may be actually finding it difficult to understand what's going on, and they'll help us shape our communications work going forward.
Can you tell me about the assistance packages for pensioners and others that the government announced in relation to the switchover?
Yes, certainly. The government is providing a household assistance scheme to households where at least one person is in receipt of the maximum rate of the age pension, the disability support pension, carers payment, and Department of Veterans Affairs service or income support supplement payments. The help that will be provided to those households will be in the form of a high-definition digital set-top box, which will be delivered to the home, installed, and any work that's necessary on cabling in the home to make sure they can receive the signal will also be carried out. That will be carried out free of charge, and the people in those households will also be given some instruction on how to use their set-top box.
Can you tell us of the experiences in other countries in relation to the elderly and others when they've switched over to digital? And also about the approaches or the alternate approaches?
Yeah. Again, there are 2 quite useful examples. One is the USA and the other is the UK. In the USA, a scheme was put in place whereby each household were able to apply for 2 vouchers, each worth $40, to contribute towards the purchase of a set-top box. Now, that scheme was not targeted. It was available, and it continues to be available on a first-come, first-served basis, and has not been entirely successful in that a number of homes who required help were not getting that help. And in fact, the only help that people were getting was financial through that voucher. Most of the research that's been done in this field suggests that the difficulties that more vulnerable groups have is understanding of what's happening in the first place, and the practical ability either to go and select the equipment or to bring it home and install it. The US scheme really doesn't deal with either any of those issues. Another scheme which is similar to ours is that which has been deployed in the United Kingdom, and that is based on a very similar premise that people require practical in-home assistance. And there they have targeted a scheme towards older people and those with disabilities, and that involves the provision of a set-top box and practical help also. And that seems to be working reasonably well in the areas that have switched over so far.
Can I just ask a question there? Does a household, for the purposes of providing a set-top box for people in receipt of pensions, include persons living in aged care facilities?
Yes, it will, but what it won't do is if someone's living in an aged care facility, where there are a number of people living there, then each person who requires that assistance, providing they essentially constitute a household, in other words, they're living on their own, but they're in a building with lots of other similar people, they will be entitled to assistance for the set-top box.
Each of them?
Each of them.
Right.
If they are dependent on a television that is solely for their use. So in other words, if their living circumstances replicate that which they would if they were living on their own or with their family. What the scheme won't do, though, in those cases is provide the assistance with cabling and antenna systems, because those, in that case, are the responsibility of the care home and the people who are managing that particular establishment.
So, for example, in an aged care facility, when there's people living in a lodge and they live in a room, a bedroom effectively, or an ensuite with an ensuite, and they all have a television in their room, in my experience. So the individual people will get a set-top box, but the cabling and associated requirements, which may include things like an additional, power point, will have to be provided by the aged care facility owner.
Yeah. If the television is owned by the individual, so the particular elderly person, then they will receive the assistance through the scheme.
Yeah.
If the television is actually owned by the establishment, then they won't receive the help.
Yeah.
If the elderly person was living in their own home and owned their television and were also responsible for the antenna and cabling, they would receive assistance to upgrade that part of the deal as well. Where they're living in an establishment where the television belongs to them, the television will be upgraded with a set-top box, but the antenna and cabling will remain the responsibility of the owner of the establishment. Now, we are conducting separate research into the multiple dwelling unit sector to identify those cases where those kind of establishments may have a problem and to provide some guidance on how to deal with that. And our communications work is also designed to raise awareness of that particular problem, to ensure that owners of such establishments take action in plenty of time, so that when we go there with a set-top box, the antenna work has been done in advance.
All right, thank you. Are there further questions on this issue?
You finished, Senator?
Sorry.
It's about television black spots.
Just on the
is that that's the area I was going?
I just want to keep going on the assistance program. Who's going to run this assistance program?
We are currently putting together tender documents for the rollout of the assistance program in Mildura, where we believe there are about 3,500 eligible households. What we will do...
just remind me, who is eligible? Is it any pensioner? Or?
It's the max rate pensioners, people on disability support pension and so on and so on. So there are various groups that I outlined before.
Yeah, but I just want to be clear, I don't want any confusion. Those people on those benefits have to be on the maximum rate of those benefits.
Maximum rate.
Okay, so it's not everyone on those.
No.
Just make it really clear.
So it's maximum. The household has to have at least one person who's in receipt of the maximum rate of the age pension, disability support pension, carers payment, and the DVA service or income support supplement payments.
Right.
So at least one person has to be in receipt of the maximum rate under each of
Not
those.
single parent pension?
No, just the groups that I've listed.
Right, so you're
we are
letting a contract in Mildura.
That's right. What we'll do is we are currently working on the tender documents for a service to be provided by an external party to source the set-top boxes, excuse me, to deliver them to the home and to install them. That will be an external party, I would expect, with some logistics experience and so on.
Yeah, who are we talking about? I mean, what sort of business would that be?
Well, that will
a retailer of set-top boxes, or
that will depend on the tender. I mean, it needs to be someone who has experience of providing this kind of service in home, and it will need someone with particular sensitivities towards the target groups. We'll also be working with...
Well, that's what I'm asking. Do such organisations or businesses actually exist to any great degree?
We're being coy about naming any firms, but...
No, I don't want you to name firms. I'm saying that what types of companies? They
well,
are in
existence. There are companies now that service vulnerable groups in their homes now. You think about the hack service providers and so on.
They've got to be able to buy, obtain and install this gear, haven't they?
They'll need to be able to source the equipment. They'll need to be able to manage the logistics of that. They'll need to be able to contact those particular individuals. They'll need to be experienced in providing services to the more vulnerable people that we're talking about. And I anticipate there are a number of organisations who will feel they're capable of doing that. We'll also be working with Centrelink, who will be assisting us in identifying the particular individuals and managing some of the initial communications.
Well, I was going to ask you, who has to take the action to identify eligible households? Is that the eligible household itself?
Centrelink.
That will be Centrelink.
Centrelink will tell you.
Centrelink will know who they are because of the currently customers of Centrelink.
Right.
Yeah.
So they will advise you. You will have an arrangement with them, but they will advise you who you have to.
That's correct.
Offer the service to. Yeah. I notice you're getting $15 million for Centrelink to provide support to you. That's what that's for.
That is what that is for, yeah. And in fact, legislation was passed in the House of Representatives yesterday to amend some social security legislation, which will allow Centrelink to actually identify those people, to write to them, and sort of facilitate what we need to do.
Yep. Okay. So you'd envisage... Well, I understand why Mildura is a pilot. So at this stage you're piloting this proposition that external providers perform this work, and you'll see how that goes in Mildura.
Yes.
And then roll that out. And
our intention is to procure on a regional basis.
Yeah.
And that's another of the advantages of having a regional switchover. It allows us to do these things to pilot each stage.
Yeah. The advantage of Mildura, Senator, was that they already had a relatively high acceptance of digital TV.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So we're not expecting it to go perfectly. In fact, we wouldn't learn anything if it did.
Sure. There'll be glitches, no doubt. No, but I think I support the way you're approaching it. Yeah. That's all I had on assistance.
Any further questions? Can I just clarify?
We do, but that's all on assistance.
Just going back to the aged care facilities, so people who live in independent living units that they may or may not have paid a bond to live in, what's the situation with them?
Like a retirement village, Andy, like it might have two villas next to each
As
other.
opposed to the hostel or the high care person, there's the independent living person.
I mean, the basic principle is that the owner, the assistance is being provided to the person with responsibility. So if the home in which the elderly person lives is their home, and they own the television and they are responsible for the antenna system, then they will receive the assistance. If the television doesn't belong to them, or if the antenna system and so on is maintained by somebody else, then they won't receive that assistance because they will be reliant on somebody else to do that.
So in this instance, the television will be owned by the elderly person, but the antenna would be owned by the aged care facility that owns it. So the person would just get the set-top box.
They just get the set-top box, yeah.
So the ownership of the set-top box will vest in the eligible household.
The eligible household. That's correct.
So they could just go and flog it an hour after you install it if they wanted to. I'm not suggesting they're likely to.
Not if they want to carry on watching telly.
Yeah, I'm sure this is a better way than vouchers, but there are risks associated with it. But
only if they don't actually want to see digital television.
Yeah, well, but well,
or if they'd already bought a digital-enabled TV and simply hide that fact, but people can.
Yeah, well, they have to establish that they don't have a set-top box.
No, they can always find a way to rort it if they.
Will every eligible household simply get a set-top box? Whether they've got one or not already or not?
The eligible households will be contacted and invited to join the scheme. The issue with whether or not they've got a set-top box is a very delicate one because, of course, the question of proof is actually extremely difficult. When the UK government wrestled with this particular issue, they concluded that there was very little sense in actually requiring people to prove whether or not they'd already got digital television because it would actually be excessively difficult to do that. So
they could simply sign to that effect.
Sorry?
They could simply sign to that effect, swear to that effect, couldn't
They could indeed do that, and we are still working on the final details of the tender, but the actual scheme as it's currently approved is such that any household who has someone who qualifies is entitled to that assistance. What's happened in the UK is something like 50% of homes. So in the UK, the scheme was partly free, and partly a co-payment for certain groups. For those who received the service free of charge, only 50% of eligible homes were actually taking up the assistance, and there hasn't been any significant evidence that those who've already converted are actually taking advantage of the scheme.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, one of the potential traps for you is the extent to which the Daily Telegraph discovers that free set-top boxes are turning up at pensioners' homes where they've already got them and things like that, you know. But
Senators, we are scheduled to go for a tea break. I'm taking it we've got enough questions to continue on afterwards.
How long do you reckon you'll be, Simon?
Well, I've only got black spots, which I know Senator Woodley has as well.
I've got a few general ones around switch over, not heaps.
And Senator Ludlam's got.
Do people want to continue on?
You've got committed to EB.
Oh, I may as well do 10 minutes break.
I'm happy. If we think we can be finished by 10 or 10:15, I'm happy to keep going.
Yeah, I'd rather continue and try and finish at 10.
Okay, let's go then.
I was handing it back to Senator Woodley on black spots, I think.
Thank you. So, and you'll follow through on the same topic? Okay. There's signal deficiency and television black spots in Australia, and just wondering why these signal deficient areas exist, and also why aren't broadcasters made to service their licensed areas to fix these areas of signal deficiency?
Oh, sorry.
The Broadcasting Act doesn't require broadcasters to actually broadcast comprehensively across their licence areas.
It's actually worth going back to a clause of the Broadcasting Services Act, subclause 6.3f, which deals with the concept of same coverage. And the law actually says that as soon as practicable after the start of the simulcast period for a licence area, so when digital starts alongside analogue, and throughout the remainder of that period, the transmission of a commercial television broadcasting service in standard definition digital mode should achieve the same level of coverage and potential reception quality as is achieved by the transmission of the service in analogue mode. So that the law is essentially saying that the coverage and reception of digital should be the same as analogue.
But we already have many areas of signal deficiency.
Sure. So that's kind of what the law says. The way in which that is regulated is that the ACMA agree conversion schemes both with the commercial broadcasters and with the national broadcasters, which are the attempt to meet that obligation. And enforcing those conversion schemes is obviously a matter for the ACMA. The the reality is that the way in which analogue television signals are propagated through the airwaves is somewhat different from digital. One of the issues is that the way in which analogue signals are broadcast means that when they start to fail, that happens gracefully. And so if you're watching an analogue signal, as it starts to deteriorate, the picture becomes snowy and blurred, but you can carry on watching it, you can carry on listening. And a number of people are watching analogue television who are probably not counted as having a television signal available to them because it's of such poor quality. In the same circumstances, a digital signal will fail in a completely different way. So that for a considerable period of time, the picture's absolutely perfect. But as it starts to fail, it literally goes, it freezes. Or you get pixelation, or the sound starts snapping and popping and crackling. And that can mean that people's experience of digital is somewhat different from analogue, and that in itself can create new black spots, so that where people are currently watching an analogue signal that they are comfortable with, but perhaps the broadcasters don't treat as actually being covered, may not be able to receive a digital signal. So that's essentially why black spots exist, and they are very high on the government's priorities for finding a solution. And that's why in Mildura, for example, we have announced a pilot which is looking at the use of satellite broadcasting to provide a signal into areas where otherwise there would be a black spot.
So that was the reason that the satellite was chosen for Mildura?
That's correct, to pilot the use of satellite to reach homes where a terrestrial digital signal may be quite difficult. That's often because of terrain issues and so on.
Well, yeah, it's important that we get it right. Some countries have already made the switch over to digital, and they've obviously resolved these issues of signal deficiency and black spots. How have they managed to resolve them?
Well, that's a combination of factors. In some countries, particularly in Europe and particularly in the United Kingdom, there is already an existing free-to-air satellite service which provides the terrestrial analogue free-to-air signals in digital form on satellite, which provides essentially a backup for anybody who can't receive the terrestrial signal. In some of the other countries that have switched over, particularly the Netherlands, Luxembourg and so on, those countries are relatively small and relatively flat and don't experience the kind of black spots that we suffer in Australia with our particular challenging terrain. Canada is a similar, they have a similar issue to us in that a large number of people live along the border of the United States, and then a relatively smaller number of people live across vast areas of wilderness. And there is an increasing reliance on satellite services to provide those signals to people who live in Canada. So satellite is an established technology. It's been around for a number of years. It's quite reliable, and several countries are in fact using it as a backup to make sure that everyone has access to a digital signal.
Don't Foxtel and Austar use satellite?
That's correct.
I currently receive my Foxtel by satellite.
The problem with satellite, though, isn't it, is that it doesn't discriminate. You can only have basically one signal. You won't get anything that's local. It'll only have, presumably, a national...
I'm not sure in the modern technology age that's quite an accurate statement Senator mentioned.
Well, I'd love to believe it wasn't accurate, but I thought that was the big issue with satellite.
In terms of the Mildura trial, I recall Mr Townend last time indicating that it was a national broadcast in a sense that was going in there, not a Victoria specific.
No, there
I'm
would
not
be...
sure that's what Andy would have said.
What was
well, can Mr Townend clear that up for us?
Yeah, there will be ABC and SBS services, which clearly are sort of they're national services, but there'll be the relevant regional service, so there'll be the same ABC and SBS that people are currently receiving in that area. There will also be a service from three commercial networks, and that will be a local service now. We're currently working with the broadcasters on precisely what that is. But to go to the nub of the question, it is perfectly possible to have a range of different services on satellite targeted at particular areas. Physically, that signal is across the whole of Australia, but by use of smart card technology, which sits in the box, you are able to govern which particular service a given household receives. So if you live in Mildura or in Victoria, and you have a card which basically has your address embedded in the card, and that can go into your set-top box, and that then presents to you the services which are relevant to you. And that, again, is technology which is used across the world.
I just think Senator Minchin was thinking of it from the other perspective, not at the smart card encryption level, more that you're only broadcasting the one signal from up off the satellite. I think that was the perspective that Senator Minchin was asking the question.
But in fact, it's perfectly possible to broadcast more than one signal on satellite. So there's plenty of space on.
So it can discriminate in
satellites.
effect.
It can discriminate, and you can broadcast more than
Well,
one.
it just means
What are the
15
cost
signals.
impacts of
You've got 15 signals
Yeah,
coming down,
I understand that. But
and then the smart card actually can decode it.
what are the cost implications of broadcasting multiple signals by satellite?
yeah, that's right. Whose satellite and who pays for it?
Well, there is a trade-off, of course, because there are cost implications for building towers across Australia, and there are cost implications for the renting of transponder space. That is why we are currently in extensive consultation with the broadcasting industry to determine what is the most cost-effective way of actually reaching people in more remote and indeed in many regional areas. There is a balance between the number of services people receive and the way in which you deliver it to them.
I understand there's trade-off between the options, so I was just related to Senator Minchin's question. Is there a significant cost difference between broadcasting one signal from your satellite versus broadcasting 24 signals from your satellite?
Each one requires you to reserve a slot.
So each channel that you're broadcasting uses a certain amount of capacity on the satellite, and it costs the same as any other. So there's obviously a multiple. The other issue to bear in mind...
So it's one of those things that is technically possible, but if you were talking about every regional area across Australia and every regional television station across Australia, it may be technically possible but cost prohibitive.
There is a trade between doing it in that particular way and building an ever-expanding series of towers, which also has a cost issue, because you can't build a single tower that broadcasts to everybody, so you have to have lots of towers. But also, the use of satellite is spectrum efficient in that it's not using scarce broadcasting spectrum, whereas there is a risk that if you start building towers and using terrestrial spectrum, that you start eating into spectrum that could be used for other purposes.
Digital dividend we were talking about some stage a long time ago.
If you use satellite, does the recipient have to have a dish?
Yes, that's correct. They would need a set-top box capable of receiving that signal, and they would need a dish on their house as well. In
the Mildura trial now, how many dishes have been provided or taken up? I understand from checking back over the Hansard, it was a $666 to the consumer cost and a $300 Commonwealth subsidy per satellite dish.
We haven't started rolling any out yet, no. We know that in Underbull, which is an area that has a self-help transmitter, that there are 89 households who would be reliant on the satellite. There's also in Oyen, which is a little bit further along the road, there are about 500 households. And those are people who've actually, I think I mentioned last time, these are people who built 20 or 30 metre towers to receive a terrestrial signal and are struggling to do so.
I drive through there often, and that's for that.
And they've spent a great deal of money trying to receive a terrestrial signal. So whilst there is an incremental cost to a dish and a set-top box, you also get much more certainty of a signal, and you don't have to have a huge tower on top of your house.
Has the cost and the budget for the Mildura trial been settled? I think I asked you about this last time, and you were still negotiating or tendering the satellite broadcast and so on.
We're still in discussions with the broadcasters and other infrastructure providers about the exact way in which that service will be delivered.
Okay, so I take it those discussions are still of commercial sensitivity such that you wouldn't wish to be revealing budgeted prices.
Well, just on the satellite issue, you've been repeatedly asked, I think, at estimates about a discussion paper you're intending to issue on this issue of satellites. It was last due in March, and I gather still not out, which suggests not your inefficiency, but that you are having some difficulty resolving the issues to go into this discussion paper with the broadcasters, eh? Is that the... problem? You still committed to a discussion paper?
That's correct. The matter we were discussing earlier, which is that trade-off between the number of services you require on the satellite, the cost of that, the number of towers you might need to build, the impact on spectrum that might otherwise be able to be used in another way, is actually quite a complex issue, and we are trying to look at how we might resolve that across the whole of Australia. So it makes sense to progress discussions with the broadcasters to a certain point before we issue a discussion paper more broadly.
Because, I mean, we're all getting quite a bit of correspondence and traffic from these local communities, expressing considerable concern about this. The expression you use, I think, is a clear transition path, quote unquote. But I think this is becoming urgent. I'm not quite sure what you're doing to pacify these regions around Australia. That be patient, but it is becoming. Even the district of Yankalilla, which we all know well, featured in Mark Day's column in the Australian. I saw.
And he said, just abandon them. Can you believe it?
And of course, we 3 South Australian senators, 4, are very keen to look after Yankalilla. But I mean, it's just an example of many districts that are getting quite concerned. And I think the problem is they're starting to, employ lobbyists and do all sorts of things they shouldn't have to do or want to do.
There are actually 3 sets of discussions going on at the moment with the broadcasters on this very subject. One is detailed planning for Mildura. The other is looking at a sort of solution for Australia as a whole. But we've also now started talking to the regional broadcasters in South Australia, which is the second region to switch, the second half of next year, looking at the detailed planning for that. And this is absolutely top of our agenda. And there's a great deal of time and work being invested in.
You should certainly assure those people are wasting their money on lobbyists.
I'd be happy to. Senator McDonald has particularly asked me to also raise the concern of the residents of Gladstone about this issue, and it's I'm not sure where Central Queensland features in your timetable.
That's actually in the second half of 2011.
Yep. 2011. Well, I've got a little bit more time.
A little bit more time.
Australians have, but I just want to register for Senator McDonald's sake that it's an issue in Central Queensland.
Senator Minchin, I might see if Senator Ludlam would like to ask a few questions. Sorry, he hasn't.
Yeah, I've got a few
There you go.
along these lines. Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering whether you're able to estimate for us on the balance of what you're discovering in Mildura, the proportions of, because there's a push-pull process going on, I suppose. On the one hand, you're trying to educate people to buy into the technology themselves, and on the other hand, you're trying to extend the coverage of the signal so that people can receive it. What do you think is the balance going to be between terrestrial transmission, infill from new terrestrial towers and satellite, in terms of number of customers?
Well, that really comes back to the debate we've just been having.
Yeah. Is there do you have any sense yet, given that it's getting pretty close, of what Mildura is going to look like?
No. I mean, if you actually look at the situation across Australia as a whole, already 9 out of 10 homes can access all the digital services terrestrially. And in fact, I think it's about 97% of homes can receive the ABC terrestrially. So the vast majority of homes across Australia can already receive terrestrial signals.
That's just signal strength. That's not whether they've got a set-top box and so on.
That's the signal is basically passing over their roof. So if they've got a set-top box and connected it to their area, they should be able to receive that. The end result will depend on the discussion that we've just been having. But if you look at Mildura, for example, 7 out of 10 homes have already got digital television right now. And we know from the work that the ACMA have done that the problem areas are those which we already know about. So they've done signal strength tests in Mildura, and we know that the areas of problem are those that we've just discussed, which are the 89 homes in Underball and the just over 500 homes in Oyen, and perhaps a few very small number of others scattered. And we already know that they are, we're planning to deliver a signal to them by satellite beams.
Yeah.
And a similar situation almost certainly exists across Australia.
All right. In discussions earlier in the evening, we also heard that satellites will play a role in picking up the 10% of the population that won't be reached by the fibre to the premise national broadband network. And I'm just wondering whether the equipment that people would be installing in the dish that'll go onto the roof for the TV rollout is likely to be compatible
with the infill services that are being proposed for the NBN rollout? Or are people going to have two separate dishes pointing in different directions at different satellites?
Probably should take that on notice just so we can get.
I'm presuming I'm not the first person who's thought that.
We'll have to get the right technical answer. I wouldn't want to take a lash outside the off stump and mislead you. So we'll take that one on notice.
Okay, yeah, I would greatly appreciate that. Just getting back to the digital tracker survey, in the work on the domestic aerial systems in Mildura, just from the survey work that you're doing, did you ask in the survey just released about what aerials respondents are using in Mildura?
Now, if you're you're talking about work that was actually carried out on domestic aerials. I think, therefore, you must be referring to the survey that was carried out by the ACMA.
Okay.
Because ours was not designed to
it wasn't. It didn't
catch
that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's just confirm that. So the tracker survey didn't go into the kind of aerials that people have currently installed.
I'd have to check. So we will check that.
There's a number of different surveys being done at the moment.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, ACMA already gone, and you assumed it was Mr. Townend's.
The tracker was certainly not designed to ask detailed questions about the quality of antenna installations. There may well be questions that contribute to that, but that was not its primary purpose. I believe what you're talking about is the work that the ACMA carried out in Mildura.
Okay, so you're taking your information on the quality of aerials and antennas that people are using from that separate source.
That's principally the source,
yeah. In an answer to questions on notice from myself, number 65, 7, 8 and 9. I don't have a date for you, but I'll see if I can track that down for you. There was the proposal for that discussion paper on the need for the infill transmission sites. Do you have an estimate of when that would be provided?
No, again, sorry, that refers back to the conversation we had earlier, where we are in intensive discussions with the broadcasters about the trade between the various elements of the two different ways of reaching people. So.
All right. It sounds like this is all more or less up in the air still. What's your state of confidence that you're going to be able to hit the benchmarks that have been set for the first region to switch off next year? Are you generally happy with how things are tracking along?
Well, the timetable provides for Mildura to switch in the first half of next year.
Yeah.
And there is no question at the moment that is what we are working towards. There's a lot of work to be done. But the work that we're doing is designed to ensure that we can switch off during the first half of next year.
Yep. And you think we're going to hit that target?
That's what we're working towards, yes.
I'll take that as a qualified yes. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Senator Levin. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Chair. Just finishing off on things like the satellite service and so on. This is a trial, as we've established, for Mildura, and you'll put out your discussion paper to try to assess how people operating off of self-help transmitters and all of those sorts of problems that we've canvassed previously might be fixed through this process. Is there any funding allocated for the remainder of the switchover for any of these types of services?
Notice funding allocated for satellite or terrestrial going forwards beyond. Yeah, no, I think the answer is no. Yeah.
No.
No. Okay. So we've got the 138.7 mil that was allocated in this year's budget. That doesn't cover any of those types of services. Relates purely to information and communications campaign.
It actually relates to the information and communications campaign, which will provide continued national awareness building, but also will provide specific tailored advertising in the next three regions, so regional South Australia, regional Victoria and regional Queensland. And it also provides for the household assistance scheme that we talked about earlier, that's the maximum rate recipients of the age pension and so on, in those three regional areas also. That's the regional South Australia, regional Victoria and regional Queensland. And that will extend the number of eligible households to somewhere in the region of 250,000.
Firstly, in relation to this allocation, why is there nothing allocated for regional New South Wales, regional Western Australia, Northern Territory, or indeed any of the metropolitan areas?
This is a pilot program that will inform us on the future funding allocations that we will need. It's to allow us to learn what works and, importantly, learn what doesn't work. So it's a pilot program.
So all of South Australia, Victoria and Queensland in regional areas are the pilot program for the communications. It's half of regional Australia.
Effectively, because of the lead times, you need to get ahead with your planning. We can't do Mildura and completely stop. So we do want to give people some certainty about the process and the timetable. But it is also true that we generally do want to look at the lessons learnt out of Mildura and, if necessary, go back to the government and suggest changes. So I think this is a considered way to achieve both objectives. I know they sound somewhat contradictory, but you do want to provide certainty, but you also want to make adjustments where there are significant learnings.
You're not going to be able to switch over regional New South Wales or regional Western Australia or the Northern Territory or whatever without some sort of information and communications campaign.
It's worth adding that I think I mentioned that the information, the money that we have for communications is not solely directed towards those three areas. There's also funding for continued national communications. So, for example, this year we already have plans for 2 further bursts of national communications. One will be 3 or 4 weeks in September, around about sort of Father's Day, and then a further 2 to 3 weeks during November, December in the run-up to Christmas. And that's what we're planning for this year. There'll be more planned for next year and in subsequent periods. And that's designed to continue to raise awareness across the whole country. So the funding that we have for the next couple of years is focused on those first 3 regions, because that's the regions that are converting earlier. But there's also there's money there for us to communicate to the country as a whole. And the way the funding has been released is designed to follow that timetable. And there is plenty of time to learn from what we're doing and to return to government for funding for the remainder of the programme. So it's not actually stopping us doing anything that we would want to be doing.
Concern I have, and I understand Scott's desire and your desire, Mr Townend, and the Minister's, I'm sure, to proceed with certainty as to what you're going to be doing in the back end of the program. The concern I have, and it's not the first time it's come up in these estimates, is that something that is quite transparently going to be an expenditure for government in the out years, and in this instance we know that unless the timetable is varied, everywhere is switching over by the end of 2013, that there is nothing allocated in this funding package for any expenditure in 2012-13 in the lead up to those final other regions switching over. That obviously there's a significant further tranche for the forward estimates that are meant to be being reflected in the budget papers that hasn't been reflected at this stage.
No, look, as I said, this is a pilot program to give us guidance to ensure that we get it right. I would assume that you would have thought that was a far more prudent way to do it.
Well, Minister, I think running the pilot program is quite prudent, but I would have thought that budget estimates would indeed reflect the estimate of the costs that you might be incurring in the future, noting that those costs need to be adjusted as you learn lessons from the pilot program in future budgets.
Well, Far North Queensland is the last half of 2011, New South Wales is 2012, remote Australia and Western Australia is 2013. I think that's an accurate description, and I think, Mr Townend, in terms of funding for regional Victoria, Queensland and South Australia, have they been announced?
Yes.
That's what this is.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm just trying to work out.
That's what this is. It's that your forward
So-
estimates go out to 2013, but annual switch-off goes out to 2013, indeed concludes in 2013, but half the country is missing from the funding that's budgeted so far. But
Half the geography might be. I'm not sure half the country is in terms of people.
well, half of regional Australia, and I'm not going to split hairs arguing over whether that's half the people or half the geography when we come to that. But okay, in terms of assistance and support, where do community broadcasters sit at present in terms of support for the switchover?
It'd be fair to say that they were, community broadcasters were hopeful that they would have had an immediate path revealed in the budget, and it'd be fair to say that I think they're disappointed that that wasn't the case. We're going to be engaging with them in the near future as part of our ongoing dialogue to continue to work through some complex issues to ensure that they are not left behind.
Obviously,
What's complex about it?
There are a range of technical issues that we've sorry, my voice is going. A range of technical issues around spectrum allocations. There's been argument about just moving them unilaterally out of what's been referred to in the past as the Channel A spectrum. So we're in discussions, or we have been in discussions. Haven't had the opportunity since the budget was only a few weeks ago, but we're working on a number of proposals to engage them in discussions with over the next few weeks. I'm just not quite sure when the appointment's been made for, but we're certainly keen to maintain an ongoing dialogue with them.
Well, I think it's becoming a matter of urgency that something's done. I mean, to the extent you are successful in getting people to convert, and I commend you on that, it's becoming a massive problem for them because people can't, if they
No, it
switch
would have
to
been
digital,
helpful. It would have been helpful.
Channel 31.
It would have been helpful when the new legislation was introduced, if that path had been put in place. I absolutely agree with you, Senator Minchin. It would have been helpful if around the Cabinet table and the ERC table in the past, if he had bitten the bullet on it and given them a pathway. But
it's our fault now, is it?
Well, actually, for setting up the program without giving them a pathway, I think it'd be possible to suggest that perhaps you were a little lax. And we're working through.
Well, I'm sure you.
Sorry, we are working through.
Timetable.
We are working through.
Been there 18 months.
Sorry, the previous government had no plans for 6 years. Your words for 6 years were, we'll just explore your options. So after 18 months, we are working through.
You're still working on plans.
Our inheritance from you. And while I understand the disappointment of the community TV section that their pathway wasn't outlined in the budget, we're committed to continued discussions with them.
Can you give them any guarantees as to timelines?
Well, we'd like to have that conversation with them directly, but we've assured them they will not be left behind.
But I think they already feel that they are being left behind.
That's probably because they didn't get a pathway in the 6 years of your former government.
Well, and they also didn't get a pathway in this budget. They didn't get a pathway when you announced the timetable, and they didn't get a pathway in last year's budget. So,
and the six before that.
Well, and it's fine. You can talk about the 6 before
Yeah,
that. They're pretty interested in the here and now, as the take-up rate, which we've heard from Mr. Townend and indeed yourself today, Minister, has escalated significantly.
Yeah, that's the point. When take-up was low, it didn't really matter, but as take-up levels rise...
We plan to convert them well before switchover. They're almost all in capital cities. So a Mildura 2010 deadline doesn't impact on them, I don't believe. So we're committed to converting them well before switchover.
No, it's not a matter of switchover.
It wouldn't matter if they were simulcasting, but of course they're not simulcasting.
Right.
Really? Did you not give them any spectrum for 6 years?
Come on, Minister.
Did you really not give them
duck.
spectrum for 6 years?
They don't want to hear you playing those sorts of games any more than at 10:05 tonight. We want to hear you.
They want to know what you're going to do.
I appreciate that you have some embarrassment on it, Senator Lodman.
No, they want to know what you're going to do. Senator Conroy?
to advocate on this, but
you probably
your position is minimal when it comes to credibility on this particular issue.
If Senator Ludlam can get more sensible answers from you, he's welcome to ask some of the questions.
He will get the same answers that that I've given you on this issue. We are continuing to work with them to solve what is a difficult situation, and we are committed to converting them well before switchover. I would add that I think the Freeview box have reached an agreement, Andy, to include community TV. Has that been... Sorry? They haven't reached an agreement. Well, we're hopeful that they will be able to reach an agreement.
Not much good news for them.
They need to be able to broadcast in digital, that's the problem. You need to give them spectrum, as I understand. Is that right?
That's one of the issues which we're struggling to overcome from the legacy that you weren't able to give them any spectrum in that 6-year period that you were in charge of the process.
The community broadcasters won't be impressed with that line of argument, Senator Conroy. You won't do yourself.
I've spoken to them more times than you have.
Fix the problem.
I've spoken to them more times than you have in your entire life, Senator.
Well,
Minchin.
I just was recently with
I assure
Channel
you
31
I'm very
in Melbourne.
familiar with their perspective.
I was just with Channel 31 in Melbourne, and their vitriol
Good
was,
people.
Yeah, they're very good people.
Good people. I'm glad you finally met them after how many years
Senators?
as a minister?
No, I haven't been in this portfolio for that long, but I was delighted with the enthusiasm of Channel 31, and I would urge you to solve the problem as soon as possible.
As a Melbourne resident, I don't need to go far to see Greg and the team. They're doing an excellent job on the smell of an oily rag, and we are committed to resolving their difficulties.
Okay.
Thank you, Minister. I think Ms Scott's got something to say.
Yes, Chair, just before the time ticks away, and we just have one small correction to an answer that was given previously to Senator Minchin from Mr Besgrove about the international payments to international organisations. Could we just read it into the record? It'll only take 30 seconds, and then it will just mean we don't have to write complicated letters and people recall weeks later what it was about. If I could have the indulgence of the committee.
There you go.
Simon, Chief Financial Officer. The answer to the question, I think, was concerning the estimate for 6.335 million. It's made up of 6.079 million, which is Australia's contribution to the International Telecommunications Union. That is fully recovered through the Telecommunications Carrier Licence Charges Act 1997, and there's 256,000 to the Asia Pacific Telecommunity. Right. And I think Mr Besgrove may have said 181 member states. It should have read 191 member states.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr Ash. Thank you, Ms Scott. Now, are there any further questions?
Can I just quickly congratulate you on this first report on digital television transmission and reception as required by the Senate. I think outstanding amendment by the Senate to the Minister's legislation, and I thank you for a good report in response to it.
Thank you. Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Chair. With as few references to the previous government as you're able to manage, there are a couple of separate issues. Obviously, the cost of transmission equipment and training and so on, installation of gear, is one issue for the capital city community TV stations, those of them still standing, and regional broadcasters like NITV. So capital equipment is on the one hand, spectrum allocation on the other. Can we address the two separately? How much, first of all, for the capital city community broadcasters, how much do they need to make the transition?
A figure of $2 million rings a bell. I'm sure I'll get some further information on that shortly, but I suspect if we can get an update on that figure, that's the sort of figure I think has been kicked around.
How does that compare with what you've needed to appropriate for the digital pathway for the ABC and SBS, for the public broadcasters, for example? Now, the figure I've got here, so correct me if I'm wrong, spread across 3 years is $795 million. Does that sound about right?
I didn't quite catch that, Senator Ludlam.
For the upgrade path for ABC and SBS over 3 years. Does it sound roughly right?
We might have to take that on notice. We just don't have it handy.
That's all right. I guess what I'm getting to, it's a vastly larger sum of money, so I guess just to make the observation at the outset that if it is indeed $2 million, if it's of that kind of order, I would have thought relative to the size of the appropriation that public broadcasters have just secured, which obviously nobody in this room would begrudge, I don't think, it's a tiny fraction of money, and I'm just wondering why the decision was not to simply include them at this stage, given that the first region's switching off in 12 months.
First region that I don't think covers.
The capital cities won't cover it, but I guess it would be.
Are there any community TV stations you're aware of in Mildura?
I am wondering whether NITV would broadcast into that area.
I think they're.
That's a question, not a statement.
NITV is not a community broadcaster.
Well, I'm referring at the outset. Sorry, go ahead.
NITV are broadcast on the Aurora.
They're primarily broadcast on satellite.
Yeah, they're a satellite.
Okay, maybe we'll come to them separately. So, what are the public policy reasons, I suppose, for leaving the capital city community TV stations out at this stage?
And just to save you time, NITV is actually not in this portfolio. It's in Mr. Garrett's portfolio.
It's in the arts portfolio. That's an awful shame.
It's a historical anomaly, but just so you know where to address questions on NITV. Sorry, you were asking about.
Can we just hold that point for just a moment? Because that's a question that I raised early this year or late last year about
the Prime Minister determines portfolio allocations. You're welcome to raise the matter with him, but the argument has been in the past that it's a cultural issue, arts issue rather than a broadcasting issue. But the allocation and the portfolio distribution is entirely the province of the Prime Minister.
Okay, does that cause you some difficulties in regulating the broadcast industry and grappling with these sort of issues?
Not substantially.
Does the
Senator Ludlam?
The agency have to work with Minister Garrett's office?
I'm sure they enjoy thoroughly working with Mr. Garrett's office. He's a pleasure to work with.
I mean, the office. Sure. I mean, the office is sitting next to you. Do you?
No, Senator.
With regards to NITV, is there a separate unit somewhere trying to figure out? There is.
The administrative arrangements are not problematic.
Okay. Maybe let's just stay with the capital city community TV stations then. They won't be affected by the Mildura switchover, but coming down the line, and also that they're losing audience share as people are switching over to digital.
I very much accept the point you're making about the audience share, and that is the reason that the sooner that they're able to transition, the better.
So how soon is
well, as I said,
likely?
I'll be engaging with them again as I have been in the not too distant future. And I hope to have a number of constructive suggestions to discuss with them, but I'm sure they'd rather I discuss them with them directly than via...
rather than reading about it in Hansard first.
Yes.
But is it a safe assumption to make that they won't be seeing anything, I mean, that there's nothing budgeted for it, so they'll be looking to next year's budget?
There is nothing budgeted for it.
They'll be looking to next year's budget for a secure... Okay. That goes to the funding. In terms of allocation of spectrum, that's not necessarily budget related.
No, that's not necessarily a funding issue.
Okay, so can you describe for us what your intentions are in that regard?
To engage them in a number of discussions in the near future and to tell them my intentions to their face.
But if they're not, if those decisions aren't tied to budget, to funding?
No, I'm just indicating I'd rather reveal my intentions to them directly rather than through a third party. Okay. I'm sure you'd rather, if I was discussing things with you, I'd talk to you direct rather than broadcast it. No puns intended.
I don't think I've got any further than you two. Thanks, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Good evening.
If there's no further questions, that concludes examination of program 1.3. And on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank all of the officers of the Department of Broadband Communications and the Digital Economy for your cooperation and assistance over the past 2 days, and thank you also to Hansard and Broadcasting and the Secretariat. Senators are reminded that written questions on notice should be provided to the Secretariat by Friday of next week. The committee will commence its examination of the Environment, Water, Heritage and the Arts portfolios tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Thanks, Ms Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your patience.